Hello everyone, welcome to Handmade Hero, show where we code a complete game live on stream. We are doing a little bonus stream here again, like I kind of just wanted to stream. I wanted to stream yesterday, I want to stream today. I don't know exactly what we're going to be doing on the game today, because again, I had planned to be on winter break, but we're not on winter break, so I don't know. Yesterday when I did a stream like this one, just drop in, we took a look at our list here of stuff. And so maybe that's what we'll do today again too. So just take a look at some stuff here that we've got on the list of things and try to clean up any loose ends that we have here. So you can see I really want to filter out enhancements probably because enhancements are things for kind of at the end of the game, like things we want to add in potentially, or maybe at least things that should be second on the list. I don't know how you do that because I don't use GitHub. You can see here there's like a filter by label. You can filter labels that you want to have in. I'm not sure how you filter labels that you don't want to have in. If I click on enhancement, I'm guessing anyway, that would show me just that. I'm wondering if I can, can you do something here? I don't know, like can you say not that thing? I don't know. So hard to say if you can do that at all, but yeah, who knows? So we may just have to leave those in there. I don't really know. And again, the Handmade Ray ones obviously aren't related to what we're doing. Those are for when we do our little Handmade Ray streams that are just kind of fun streams that are a different project altogether. So we're mainly looking at the stuff that we've got on here. I'd like to take them from the bottom on up and so on, because these have been sitting around a long time. They're just little things that really haven't had a problem with. So here we have Segfault and Handmade Brain. And this is a thing where it's just, Handmade Brain is not real code. It's sort of placeholder code for later when we implement things like enemy AIs or the player controller and things like that. But if you look in there, there's probably some stuff where if, the head gets detached from the hero or something like this, we didn't actually properly bracket it so that you can't access those things. And what you see here is we've got like body facing direction equals head facing direction. Yeah, you can see it right here. So the interesting thing about this is that you need to have both a body and a head for that to work. And it looks like it's in there. So I don't think this particular thing would actually have that problem. It looks like maybe we already fixed that because you can see the body and the head sort of already have to be on there. So let's see here. Config if head is null. To not tune if there's if head block. So I think we changed this somewhere on the line. So I think we inadvertently fixed this at some point. Looks like it's now inside the if head and body block. So I think this actually already got fixed. There may still be problems in here, but again, this code is not, we're going to do some more work with code like that in kind of in the future. We don't really need to be too worried about this. So I'm not super worried about this anyway, because it's not really a segfault I would care about. It's in code that's going to get blown away and replaced with something better. So it's not something we have to be particularly careful about. So in here, this is a different... this is not really a bug per se. This is almost an enhancement, but it's one we should probably talk about. It's not really that important to deal with now, but we might as well because it's easy fix. So what happens here, let me just explain a little bit about what this person's talking about for folks who aren't familiar with this situation. So one of the things that happens, if you think about how a personal computer, modern personal computer is constructed, you kind of know, if you're a gamer anyway, you know what it looks like. You've got a big old case, and besides the fact that it's blinged out with tons of RGB lighting, you also have a CPU in there, right, that goes onto the motherboard with a big old honking heatsink on it, or water-cooled piping, or God knows what, right? And then into the PCI slot of this thing, you've got a gigantic, usually takes up 2 slots now, a gigantic video card with a GPU chip on it, its own memory, right? It's this huge thing, giant heat spreader, fans, that thing gets jammed in there, right? And this is a huge honking thing. And now if you've ever put together a computer yourself, you also know that that gigantic, huge honking graphics card takes its own power plug, right? So the power coming off the PCI bus isn't sufficient to run this thing. It now needs its own plug, sometimes two. So that structure, if you think about it, that's powering like modern gaming at a high level, 4K graphics, super high end, all this stuff, high detail settings, 144 frames a second, whatever, all this other stuff, right? That whole world draws a ton of power. If you look at the power draw of just that GPU, the power draw of just the video card itself is usually more than the entire computer. It can draw 200, 300 watts. These things are insane sometimes, right? If you have like two of them in there or whatever. So the amount of watts going to the GPU is more than your phone battery has or laptop battery has total, right? In an hour. So 1 hour of running one of those GPUs, your phone battery couldn't even do it. Your laptop battery couldn't do it. It's drawing that much wattage per hour, right? But it's fine because it's plugged into a wall outlet, which has a ton of watts and is used to running things like washing machines and dryers, which draw tons of electricity, or charging a Tesla, for if you're one of those people who ordered a Model 3, or if you're wealthy and have a Model S. So it's fine for desktop computing to be using an incredible amount of power. But once you get to a laptop, it doesn't really have that kind of power available. So obviously you've got some other, you've got to have some other setup in there to support graphics, because the kinds of stuff that you see in a desktop is never going to fly. It could be in there to work when you plug in your laptop to a wall outlet, for example, but it's never going to work if you're just on battery power, flying on an airplane somewhere, going home for Christmas, or who knows what you're doing, and you're typing on your laptop. That graphics has to be way lower power because you just don't have the draw for it. So the solution that a lot of laptops have adopted, in the case of the PC world, is what they'll do is they'll use part of the CPU die. So basically, you got a CPU. On that die, there's a bunch of cores, right? The cores we have for CPU computing. But then there's also a little crappy GPU stuck on the die. So you've got some cores for the CPU and some cores for GPU just on one chip. Intel does this. That's what Intel Integrated Graphics is, right? AMD does this. That's what the APUs are. And that way you can just stick one of those in there and the laptop does it, and those can be low power. They can be throttled down, just like the CPU is lower power. It can throttle down, so when you're on battery power, it doesn't run very fast. It runs slower, conserves heat, conserves energy, right? But if you really need to get some high quality graphics on the screen, they will then, on the higher end laptops, they'll throw in a mobile GPU part as well, right? So there'll be another chip on there which is also a GPU, but that chip will be dormant. So it will be basically completely powered off for the most part, most of the time. So if you're just, typing into a text editor or something, it doesn't need to fire that thing up. You then go and run some piggy web page, or you run, some kind of a game, and the game will spin up the high-end GPU and render on that. Now, this drains your battery quickly, so you usually don't want to do it if the laptop's not plugged into something, but when the laptop is plugged into something, you want that GPU to get fired up. The question becomes, how does the computer know whether to turn on the GPU or not, right? Because it is a discrete decision, pun intended. If you've got a CPU that has a GPU, a weak GPU on it, and then you've also got a beefier GPU sitting there on the side that if I turn it on, I'm going to use a lot of battery, but I would get a lot better performance. How does the computer know which one to do? And the answer is it doesn't, and it often makes the wrong decision. So there's that. But if the user is savvy, they know that there are things they can do to help it out. You can go to the Nvidia control panel, the AMD control panel, the Intel Integrated Graphics panel, And there's things that you can say, this executable run on the discrete graphics part. This executable do that. And furthermore, you can set those sometimes based on whether the thing's plugged in or not. So you can say, look, if I'm plugged in, use the good GPU. If I'm not plugged in, only use the good GPU if I run this particular program. So now that brings us to this particular issue. What it says here is we've got trouble with Nvidia Optimus, right? Nvidia Optimus is the brand name for when you have an Nvidia GPU in your laptop that sits dormant until it needs to get turned on, and the Intel integrated graphics is what runs most of the time. And so what you can do is, the reason this person filed it is because we don't warrant our executable. We don't recommend that it run on Nvidia Optimus or AMD or anything. We just have a vanilla executable. So what our executable will do is run the default, right? That means by default, we'll probably run on integrated graphics. But Handmade Hero is not really something that wants to run on integrated graphics. It wants to run on the discrete GPU if it can. And so what we may want to do is, by default, say, let's ask the system to please run us on the discrete GPU if it's okay with the user. The user can still disable that. And so the question is, how do you do that? Well, one way of doing that is you can weld into your executable an actual marker that lets NVIDIA know that you want to run the discrete GPU. And similarly, you can do that for AMD. And you can see the person who is requesting it here helpfully cut and pasted those in. But these are not secret. You can find these on the internet just by searching. So it's just a known thing you can put in there. And what you want to do is you want to use these to tell the default graphic setup that, hey, as long as the user doesn't tell you not to, because the user may say, I want to run on low power, so don't let this happen. As long as you doesn't tell you not to, run us. We're one of those applications that needs the power, okay? So how does this work in practice? Well, if you go way back to the beginning of Handmade Hero, do you remember, and we've done this a couple times since then too, do you remember there's this dependency check? I don't know if this thing ever worked, the other dependency generator. That doesn't look good. Is this? Here it is. If you remember looking at the, let's see here. Let me open up ours first of all. Oops, it's in build. So we've done this a couple times. If I open up Win32 handmade.exe, what you're going to see here, right, is a sort of a listing of what our executable looks like when the system goes to read it. Now remember, go back and look at the archives if you don't know any of this stuff, because we've covered it all before. When you build a Windows executable, inside that executable, or DLL, but basically executables and DLLs both have these, there's essentially a table in there that lists a bunch of things that the executable has marked. So it's a bunch of code, right? An executable is a giant block of code and data and stuff like this. And in order for the operating system to use it, it has to have a table that basically says, you know, here's the entry point, here's where I should start running this thing, for example. But it also needs to know, like, are there any other things that I might need to know in here? Are there other things I might need to link to or options that I need to know about? And so what happens is, if you look at the Handmade executable, well, what you can see is you can see all of the things that we import. For example, here they are, right? But you can also see all of the things that we export. Now, since this executable doesn't ever get linked to by anybody else, you can see there's no exports here. So the only thing that's marked on our table, and it's not shown here, but the only thing that's marked on the table is the actual entry point that the system uses. But remember, we build some DLLs. Oops, I didn't mean to close that. So let's open one of our DLLs, one of the ones we use, right? So here's Win32 Handmade OpenGL. This is our renderer, right? And so what you can see here is if we actually look at our DLL, you can see that we export a function, Win32 load renderer, right? That's our function that our game calls. We load that in and then jump to it, right? So this is that table, and we can put as many things in there as we want. So you've seen me do this in the Win32 code, right? I load this DLL, I call getProcAddress, and I look for Win32 load renderer, right? So I can see, you know, an external executable can load a DLL, it can see what's in it. So what they chose to do for the Nvidia and the AMD stuff the way they chose to expose that preference, right, that says this executable wants to be run on, you know, Nvidia Optimus or on AMD's discrete chip if it's there, right, is they said just add some dummy stuff to this ordinal table, the export table. Just add some dummy stuff with secret names that we provide, right? And we're the only people who look for that. We'll look for it if it's there. We're not going to do anything with it, but we're just going to see that it's there. And if it's there, we'll know that that's what you wanted, right? So they're effectively using the export table as a sort of preference, as a sort of thing to put a preference in there. So they're not trying to actually provide an address like you normally would. Instead, what they're trying to do is just say, look, let's dump some settings in there, right? So instead of providing an address that, you know, you're going to jump to or do something with, instead the address is just where do you read the preference from, right? It's a good idea, right? It works pretty well, I think. It's a smart use of that feature, and it doesn't cost really anything. That making that table a little larger doesn't hurt anybody. It's not a big table to begin with. So all we would have to do if we wanted to warrant that is, you know, inside our Win32 Handmade code in here, we can just add a little thing where we say something like, you know, note, we prefer the discrete GPU in laptops where available, right? And then what we would do is we just, again, include these secrets. So here they are, right, conveniently supplied by the person. That's a great, thank you for filing that with the bug report so I don't have to go search for them, because otherwise you search on the web and you got to go dig these up yourself, right? But here they are, right? They're just two exported symbols. One is called Nvidia Optimus enablement. One is called AMD Power Express Request High Performance, right? And they literally don't do anything other than export those symbols for us. So now if we rebuild, right, all that's going to happen is when we look at our code, now if I refresh this, and I don't really know how to do that. Can I refresh this? I can't, so I guess I'll just reload it. There we go. Or maybe that did refresh. I was on the wrong one, so maybe I did. There we go. So now when I look at the executable, remember there was nothing on here before. Now both of those things show up on the import table, and both of them are like shows where the address is. If we went and looked at that address, in theory, we should see the 1 and 1. Now, I don't know if they care about what those are set to. It may, like, I don't know if they actually go in and look at what those values are. They may not. It may just be if it's there or not. But they may actually go into the executable and read what's at that offset, look, and then see if it's a 1 or not. So we want to leave it as the recommended setting just in case they actually look. But they may not look. They may just look at whether the name is there, for all I know, so I'm not sure. You can go read about it one way or the other. We don't care. We know that's what they want us to put in there to enable it, so we're just going to leave it that way. And that's it. So now, on laptops, that should just work. So that's all done. And again, if we wanted to test that, we could on a laptop or something. We can't really test it on this machine, but that's something for a little later on in the process. Also, it's kind of a hard thing to test because a lot of times those things are finicky, and so it's hard to know whether you're really getting the right results or not because there's so much cruft in the driver that may do different things or decide to do different things. Sometimes it's kind of hard to figure that out, right? Whether your setting is what's causing it to run or whether it was some thing the driver just decided to do because it knows that it should or whatever, right? So that's a little tough, if that makes sense. All right, so let's go to Linux updates now. I don't know if these are up to date or not, but this is, you know, from a while back. And so we want to see whether these see what's going on. Let's see here. So let's take a look at some of this stuff and try to figure out what we could. This one, for example, we definitely haven't fixed, so we could go try to fix that for them. The status problem here looks like we've got an issue with the window manager. So that one we might want to fix. And then this one, I don't know to what extent we're still doing that, but we can look. So all of these are things we should be able to fix for people who are running on Linux. Just makes it easier for them to keep running on Linux. So let's see if we can deal with that for them. So in the OpenGL info struct, which we have right here, basically the issue is that these names are defined as macros on Linux, unfortunately. So what we want to do is just get them out of there, right? Something like this. Just make it so there's something just name them something else, right? And that way we won't have that conflict. The only reason we're doing that, again, is just to placate the macro preprocessor so that it doesn't freak out. That's not something that happens on other platforms, but apparently it's true on Linux. So again, just renaming those should solve that problem. So that should be good. The status variable here in Handmade OpenGL, I don't know. We can just look for anything called status in a dependent thing and check. Let me just see if we've got anything here that's using the word status as a bear. Yeah, so this right here, status is a type name apparently of some kind or something like this, and so it doesn't like this. So I can just rename this to frame buffer status or something, right? And then hopefully that won't be an issue. We'll see how that goes there. That seems fine, right? And then down here where we've got this one's a little bit more subtle. So let's talk about this one a little bit more. If we go into Win32 Handmade, what you can see for our memory subsystem is that in here we've got the code that normally does allocations. You can see it's got like virtual free and virtual alloc and stuff like this, right? And so the reason that we call, if you followed Handmade Hero this far, you know how we deal with memory and all that sort of stuff. At some point, we have to call the operating system to map memory for us, because obviously, allocating memory is something a lot of programmers don't think about these days because they just use garbage collection or a language that doesn't have that concept, and memory just kind of comes out of nowhere and goes back to nowhere and you have no idea what's going on. And all that stuff's behind the scenes. For us, right, we actually are programming the actual computer here, and what that means is that at some point, we need to map into an address space, we have to reserve some part of the physical memory and the virtual memory that the operating system is thinking about as well. We have to have that reserved for us to use. And so the way we do that is with the Win32 calls virtual alloc and virtual free. Now, the way we would do it if we were programming the computer 100% directly is we'd be able to actually modify the page tables ourselves, right? We'd be able to actually create the CPU page tables that say what the memory is, but we can't do that because we're running on top of Windows, and Windows is the only person privileged to do that. So we have to ask Windows to do it for us, which is fine. It's just virtual alloc, virtual free. Virtual alloc creates a mapping of pages for us to use. Virtual free releases some of those pages back, right? Now here's the problem that's being talked about here on Linux. Obviously, when you port this thing to Linux, you also have to have a way to do that same mapping. And again, even though it's the same chip, they're both x64s probably running this thing. I mean, you could run it on an ARM or whatever, but it's probably, the Linux version is probably running an x64 as well. That, because we are not editing the page tables, we have to call the operating system to do that. It means we have two different ways we have to call the operating system, one for Linux, one for Win32. So here's the Win32 version. What's the Linux version? Well, the Linux version is memmap and munmap, I think. I can't remember what the unmap one is. Does it say in here? I don't remember. Maybe mmap itself can memmap. I don't remember what the Linux versions are. It's been a while. But point being, they are basically the same as VirtualAlloc and Virtual Free, but like all operating systems, each one is a little bit different. And for VirtualAlloc, Windows doesn't need you to tell it about the size of the pages anymore after you do the first time. So when you call VirtualAlloc and you say, I want to allocate 30 pages of memory, 30 4K pages, right? If you ever want to talk about that memory again, you only need the base pointer, because Windows remembers what the size was, and you don't have to tell it. So when you call virtual free, you notice we don't pass the size, we just pass memory. Now if you look at virtual free, what you can see is the size is actually there and is actually optional. But if you're not going to do an operation that has to do with partial, with sub working out of pages, if you're just going to release an entire chunk, you can just pass 0 because it knows what the size is, so it'll just release the whole size for you, right? So that doesn't have an equivalent on Linux. On Linux, when you call memmap, it doesn't remember the size. It has no idea what the size is. So when you go to unmap the size, you have to pass the size again, which means that the people who are porting this game to Linux, they don't have a way of conveniently doing this. When virtual free gets called, everywhere it gets called, right? So here's another one. You can see all of these. They all pass 0, and there's no way for them to make that call. So what we need to do is go through each place where we call virtual free and work backwards to make sure that that route from alloc to free always preserves the size the whole way through. Does that make sense? So that's what we need to do now. So let's start by looking for this debug platform read entire file. Are we using this stuff? How is this stuff getting used? I assume it's getting used in the asset system, but I don't really know. Let's just find out. If it's not getting used, we can also just delete it. But this is in our render test code. This stuff doesn't count. So at the moment, we're not really using it. But I'm disinclined to eliminate it entirely, only because I don't know, we may want to use it again at some point soon, right? Because again, well, I don't know. Since we've got these now, this maybe should just go away. Because maybe, I think now we've got open and close, we've got read and write. I think we should probably just use these. So let's say that this goes away. I'm going to delete those and see what happens. It looks like we've got a to-do for exactly that. Yeah, so those we don't need to change, I think, because those should just go through the regular system now, and so I don't think we really want to, yeah, I don't think we want to bother with that anymore. All right, so those are all gone now. And so in the Win32 Handmade stuff, where is that Win32 read? Where is that debug read entire file? I want that to go away. Here it is. So this stuff here, where we've got free file, memory, read entire file, write entire file, that stuff just wants to go away. And now I just want to pull out anything that was previously using that. So this stuff here, this read entire file, free file, memory, yeah, so that stuff can just go away because we have real file reading and writing in there now, which just makes more sense anyway. So that all seems good. Now we just need to deal with the other ones that are there. So there's here and there. This one we don't really have to worry about because this one is only for Win32. And also the dib section stuff we don't use anymore, right? So that's pretty much not a thing. In fact, we could probably pull this code out entirely at this point, because right now the only thing we're doing with that is changing the off-screen buffer stuff. We could just delete this entirely, because we always use OpenGL or whatever the subgraphics driver is for display. So really it's just the buffer width and height stuff that we're even using there. So what we might want to do is just say, look, global back buffer, you know, is that really a thing we should even be doing at this point? Because that's kind of old news, right? And we're really just using it for the render width and height at this point. And so I feel like that kind of just wants to go away, right? This Win32 off-screen buffer stuff, that just probably wants to die. So let's take a look at who's actually using it. And we'll just pull that out because that's just another thing we should just clean up, right? It just isn't really relevant. So yeah, let's ditch this for starters. Get that out of there. Where we're actually calling it, we'll get rid of that. So in here, we'll just have a thing that's like, you know, v2u render dim. We can preserve this. And we can also have, like, you know, all of these could still come in here. Right? So if we just go ahead and keep all of our old test resolutions, because we might want to play with those at some point as well. Right? So that should be fine. And then our render dim we can just use later. So there's only a couple places we'd really have to I forgot to delete the global back buffer. There we go. I'm like, we should have a bunch of errors, but we didn't have any errors. I'm like, what? So the main thing we're going to have to deal with is this. So I'm going to skip that for a minute. We're going to come down here. We now know that this render dim stuff should be fine. So if I just do render dim x, you know, render dim, or I think actually we can actually do that if we want, right? I don't know Win32 window dimension. I don't know what that is. So this is just an int win and height. I don't know. I guess it's an int, so maybe we wouldn't want to switch that over to a v2u because. But assuming that they can never really be negative, we should probably just switch that over to a v2u as well. Again, that's just cleanup. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to hit the N key. Okay. Can I jump to the next one? 2012. So yeah, this is all nonsense because this buffer is not used anymore, so we'll just get rid of that. And so we're really just down to this. If you look at what happens here, we've got the main window callback, and when the window position changes, what you can see here is we've got a switch for, you know, full screen sort of stuff, I think, is what's going on here. It looks like actually, I'll be honest, I don't really know what that's saying. If the window position is changing and the shift key is down. Oh, you know what? This is probably aspect ratio constraint. So are you allowed to resize our window right now? So we haven't played with this code in a while. Let me just take a look at what's going on there. Oops. Did I delete some important code there? I probably did. So my guess is, sorry, I probably deleted, since this is the quickest way for me to show you, I accidentally deleted the thing that calls the renderer to init. So in here, you can, oh, I guess I could just search for it this way. I suspect we need to call this still. No, actually, no, it's not in there. So I'm not sure why that was complaining, because that looks fine actually, right? It doesn't actually call the renderer there. So what was the problem? Why is this complaining? Show me why you are complaining, sir. The depth peel count is set to 0, which means that nobody actually ever, inside the swap buffers here, nobody actually ever called the Win32 init OpenGL call properly, it looks like. So we're calling the init here. So it seems like it should be fine. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. Oh, I see why. It's because we only have a partial rebuild here. Okay, that does make some sense, actually. So I'm going to hit this with an if 0 temporarily, just to make sure we didn't introduce another bug. But I think that was just because we had a partial rebuild, so these two things didn't agree. That our two pieces of code did not agree. But now they should be fine. Yeah, and they are. All right. So what I wanted to check was, are we actually allowed to resize this window? This window doesn't seem to be resizable. I don't know why we would have said that, actually. That seems weird. So if I go down to where we do create window, so we're creating an overlapped window. I'm not sure why we don't have our size border. So that's really weird, isn't it? So here we just say, here we say create window XA. We're passing WS overlapped window. We should just get a size border, right? We're not actually calling this because it's only in not handmade internal, so we don't go full screen. So what's the problem? How did we end up not getting a size border, a thick frame? Am I misremembering what happens with WS overlapped window? Don't ask me why that. There we go. See, WS thick frame, right there. The window is an overlapped window, same as the WS tiled window style. Overlapped caption, sys menu, thick frame, minimize box, maximize box. We've got everything else, but we can't size our window. Ah, so maybe the problem is just we're not calling set cursor properly. But even so, you can see you can see that there isn't actually room for the window, like you know. Oh, wow. Okay, so this is just Windows 10 being dumb. So you don't actually see it anymore. All right, so it's there, and we can resize our window. The only difference is that they don't draw it anymore. We must not be calling set cursor properly, because you can see, do you see how we're not getting the size area there? We're not getting it changing to the size cursor. So it is thick frame, it's just not drawn, because, you know, actually showing the user that they could drag something would be a horrible user interface decision. So what we want to do here is look at our get cursor call, set cursor call. And we want to see what's going on in there. So here you can see what's going on. This set cursor call is, well, so we can see what the problem is here. We're calling IDC arrow, but IDC arrow wouldn't actually work properly. I feel like we should be doing result yield separator, but we commented that out. We must have had a reason to do so. I'm not sure what that reason would have necessarily been. But you can see if I do that, you get the proper thing. I assume the reason we did that was because of the loading cursor or something. I'm not sure. But I would rather leave it like that so that we can properly have that work, right? I'm also interested to know debug global show cursor. So that just has to do with whether or not we're running in release mode or not. So we'll have to look at that a little bit later. Okay, so that's just going to be better for us, I think. So I think we want to leave that set cursor there. And you can see we get this loading cursor. I don't know why the loading cursor continues doing that for a while, because we have loaded, so I'm not sure what the problem is. I also don't love, like, is this our fault? I don't know whose fault this is, but like up there, up above the top, it's pretty weird how they decided to make this thing work. Like, is that how all windows work, or is that just us? So basically, they just broke their window manager. Their window manager is just broken. I mean, look. So here is where I have to put the cursor. My cursor is actually in the title bar, so it's where you would normally drag, and instead now it's the up and down. And so that means that you basically don't get a place to do that up here. You have to move down to the side. Lovely. Good job, Microsoft. All right, so nowadays they don't actually ship improved version of Windows. They just ship like things that are worse than the one that came before them. It's like a constant downward spiral. It's like, what do they call it? CFIT. It's this, right? It's like, you know, they're just intentionally driving the plane, that there was no actual failure. It's just the pilot chose to drive it into a mountain, or the ground, right? This is basically like, you know, this is Microsoft. This is... right? So like, you know, this is what we're talking about here. That's how they make their decisions nowadays. So let's go ahead and finish what we were doing here. So getting rid of that buffer, what we had implemented just here, I think as a request of somebody, was if we want this to maintain the aspect ratio, we could hold down the shift key. And so if we want that to still work, then the problem is that we had in here some code for that. It can't maintain the aspect ratio if it doesn't know what the aspect ratio actually is, right? So the render width and height here have to be set to something, because if they're not, then you can't actually figure out what the aspect ratio result should be in this case. So what we want to do there is say, you know, well, all right, let me do this too. So we kind of need some way to do this. Now, in a sanely functioning system, I'd just be able to pass that in. But of course, Microsoft uses callbacks, so I can't pass it in. And so what I have to do is set a global variable so that I can pick up this, or I could set it on the window or something absurd like that. But what I need to do here is just say, okay, this is going to be global render width, global render height, or something like that. Could do it this way. Right? And then we can continue as necessary. So in order to get that straightened out, what we need to do is have up here be a thing where we're like global render, dim. And then when I set the render dimension down below, what I can do is set the global one as well. So I can say global render dim equals render dim, and off we go. You know, that's the end of that. So now, in theory, we can re-enable that code path that involves the aspect-aware resize. So here's the non-aspect-aware resize, right? But then if I hold down the Shift key, what you can see is we get an aspect-aware resize. So now when I scale, it always perfectly fits the back buffer to the window, right? And so that just re-enables that code path, and that's that. Okay, so that's all good. That was cleanup that we should have done for sure. And so now that's done, and that's good. Looking at this Win32 window dimension thing, I'm wondering if that can go away and just be replaced by V2U, because you can see it doesn't really make a lot of sense that that's there. Like, we could just do this, right? And I think we would be fine, because it's basically the exact same thing. And so I could, in theory, cast this to U32. I possibly should threshold it, but since the right and left should never switch in that way, I think this is probably fine. Famous last words. We could check for 0 if we really got worried later, but I'm pretty sure those should never be negative, right? So anyway, there's a v2u there, and then I can just get rid of this and not have this as a thing anymore because it's dumb. So that's good. Again, just getting rid of code that we don't need. You always want to simplify if you can. We now no longer need Win32 off-screen buffer, so I think I can delete that, and we shouldn't have too much of an issue there either. So again, just kind of, you know, simplifying the code down. It's always good to do some deletions once you have stuff that, you know, has outlived its usefulness. So that's all good. Let's go back to the to-do we were trying to do there. So what we want to do in here is to, in, you know, virtual free, virtual alloc land, again, want to go find the places that we were calling that so that we can simplify it for folks on Linux. And so now we should have only one of those. So you can see there's literally only one call to virtual alloc and only one call to virtual free, I think. Well, this one's not, because that's one that's never freed. So it's really only this one here. So inside Win32 free memory block, the question is, what would this parameter be if we had to pass it? What's the size? Does the block know how big it is? And that's what we need to know here. So let's take a look if it does. If it does, we're done. If it doesn't, we are not done. Here's the memory block and the platform memory block. So let's look at the platform memory block. Yeah, so it looks good. It's got the size in there. Feels pretty good, right? So I think we have successfully put that there. So note, for porting to other platforms that need the size to unmap pages, you can get it from block.size. So I think that's all good. And if they needed it, other things that could be stored in here, right, as well. Meaning you would have Linux memory block, which could have other things as well. So I think that's all good. So I think we can safely retire this and see what happens. Right? So I think that's all good. And that takes care of that one, which is good, because I'd like to keep it so that people who are porting don't have to worry too much about it. So I'd like to maybe see if we could get through these last two here, because then we're down to almost nothing. This one is a one that we want to, it's not really a bug so much as it's like a feature we need to then go actually implement. So this is an obscure full screen bug, but we may be able to, well, I don't know if we can repro it. If we can, we might be able to fix it, so we might as well. Just following what is said here, open the game, hold the Windows key, and press the left or right arrow to place the window on half the monitor. And so just so you know what's going on, let me see here. So, right, it's this feature. I don't know if you've ever looked at this. You can use the arrow keys, if that makes sense. Ooh, hey, check that out. That's another bug we have. So minimize looks like it breaks here. The frame buffer breaks somehow. Probably because the size gets messed up. Yeah. So we're gonna have to do that too. So I'm gonna create another one here. So I would also add that to the list here. So in terms of things that break when you're trying to do Windows standard operations, that's another one there. And maybe that one's not as bad because that's an assertion, so technically it would go away and you would just not draw, and presumably it would be fine when it came back. But I'd rather not hit the assertion at all. I'd rather like notice that we have a 0x0 case happening and fix it. So let's start by reproing the bug they were talking about, though, because we want to do both of these now. So open the game, press the opposite arrow for step 2. Okay, so the bug is you force the window, use the Windows subsystem to force it over to the other side there, right? Then go full screen. So that's that, right? Then use the Windows key to force it to the other side of the screen. So that. Okay, so that doesn't do anything anymore. So maybe if I do this. So I can't seem to repro this on anything else. So I think this might be a Windows 7 only thing, because they said on Windows 7. So we can't reproduce this bug, so we wouldn't really know if we'd fixed it, but we might be able to hypothesize what we would do to fix it. So if you think about what's probably causing that bug, is Windows is forcing our window to change its size, which means we're getting a window pose changing call, or a WM size call. So like somewhere in here, right, where we would get notified of this. And, we would get this call. And so we may want to do something where if Windows forces us to change our size to something else just because it does, we go out of full screen, we should try to reset our flags, probably, or something, right? So my question mostly is just what's the best way to do that? And this is why I really wish we could repro it, because I don't really know exactly which stream of Windows messages would come in. If Windows post changes come in, that might be the one for it. So let's go in here to toggle full screen. Excuse me. And so what you can see here is this set window long, where we do like overlapped window versus not. So there's another thing that we could do there, which is like, for example, in here, when you hit that, we could remove our framing as well, potentially. So we could think of it more as like the set window long stuff should actually be in this part of the code, and it's like if the window position is going to change based on if the window position is going to change, if we would have ended up such that we will exactly eclipse the screen, change our stuff to not have overlap window, otherwise don't. So again, not really sure what to do about that, but let's just hypothesize what we would do, maybe, right? If becoming full screen, get rid of it, else don't. You know what I mean? I don't really know if you can set window long in here. Raymond, help me, Raymond. Tell me the internals of Windows. All right, Google, why did you show me that if it doesn't have the thing I asked for in it? So I'm not sure whether you can call this like I'm doing. We can try it and see. So in here, if I do set window long on that, I'm just going to see if this works. It probably won't, but you know, we'll try. So in terms of becoming full screen, what we need to know is, would we exactly eclipse the screen or not, right? And you can see on here where we do the get monitor info stuff, you know, inside this call, I could ask what that monitor size was and see. So after we do, we could say, okay, get me the monitor info, and I'm then going to see whether I'm about to set myself to exactly encompass the thing or not. So we would say, excuse me, get me the monitor info, look to see whether or not I'm lined up exactly with that monitor info. So here's where all that rect would be. This new pose here is a window pause, however you want to pronounce that. The window pause structure is going to have like the stuff in it that I need to know. So the width and height and the X and Y. So what I can do is say, look, are we exactly going to encompass this thing? So becoming full screen equals false. If we get the monitor info and we look and we see, okay, becoming full screen equals this giant test to say, does this equal the right thing? And this. Here's the width and height. Okay, so I'm just saying, look, let's compute all this nonsense here, find out what the width and height are, and then set our becoming full screen to line up with that. So the new pause, it has the, what is it, X and Y? X, Y, and then it's got the CX, CY. And so that would just say, look, if we look like we're going to take up the whole screen, then do this. Otherwise, don't do it, right? So we'll try that. We'll see if that gets us anywhere. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Okay, so what's our problem? Signed, unsigned mismatch. Okay. Term does not evaluate to a function. You're right. I agree with you, because I wasn't trying to call a function. And then the style here, we have to actually get our window style like we were doing. Let me take a look here. Toggle full screen. All right. So in terms of calling set window long, we don't really need to do it if the style isn't going to change. So really what we need to do is say if the, we'd have like here full screen style and windowed style. And, it's those two. And so what we could say is if we're becoming full screen, we could say like, style equals full screen style, or it should be more like new style, right? So I'm really just turning this if into a thing where we specify it more like this. And then I can just say, all right, if the style changed, so now I can see, what happened. If the style changed, then call it. Otherwise, don't bother, because I don't want to spam a bunch of like set window longs and make the operating system think something's happening when we're really not changing it. So now when we like resize this window, presumably it should just work fine, right? And nothing should actually change in here. It should all be good. But if I do that, in theory, well, and it didn't work. I was going to say, in theory, if we encompass the whole screen, it should do it. Although, now that I think about it, that actually doesn't do it. So it'd only be if we actually tried to go full screen. You can see it doesn't seem to have worked, right? There's full screen, and it doesn't seem to have actually done that set window long. So yeah, not one of my finest hours there. So let's take a look at what did I screw up. I'm going to convert to debug mode here. And I'm going to go over to that actual code, not here. And I'm going to go ahead and inside that size changing, I'm going to just see what's going on with that. Window pause changing. I'm going to see what happens. Like, do we ever call this at all? Right? So we do call it. And we look to see like what the old style was, what the new style is. So becoming full screen, it did correctly note that it is becoming full screen. There's the old style. There's the new style. So the full screen style is the old style without overlapped window included, right? So we do try to do it. Right, we do try to set the new style. I'm guessing you just can't call it in there. Oops, it's set window long. So the return value will be 0 in the case where this fails. Let's see if it is. I'm going to go ahead and go to disassembly here. So after we call it, it'll probably put the return in EAX. We can, even though we don't look at the return, I should be able to just look at it here, right? So it should be in this register. So it looks fine. So I'm not sure why that didn't work. Oh, I see. So it does set it, but then it sets it back. So it looks like my calling set window long kind of has the nasty effect of undoing what I did. I mean, that makes sense. So what we might want to do here is say, okay, yeah, this is kind of nasty. So in toggle full screen, what we may have to do is call that. We may have to call that set window style anyway. We may have to change it first. So I think we may have to do that because I think that's just, yeah, there's really nothing we can do about that. All right. So in theory, we should be able to get this to work without causing it to do that code path. But it didn't look like it did there, so I'm not sure why. So in here, like, we should be able to get it without, it should not call the pose changing. Oops. Meaning, it shouldn't actually call this because the new style should equal the old style, in theory. So this should only happen when we detect that we've changed sizes to something that requires this. But again, this is in the vagaries of Windows, which is always nasty. So that should set it off. And then, unfortunately, this looks like it's setting it back. Right, because there's the full screen. So why is it causing that to get called with a windowed style? Not really sure. I suppose we could use WinSpy to see what we're actually getting past. So if I open up WinSpy here, and I run this application, although let me switch it back to what it, well, let me look at it without that first. So if I go to WinSpy and say, hey man, I want to know what's going on with this window, please. Are you serious right now? Okay. So if I view the messages here, how can I tell it to show me some messages? Show me the messages. This is supposed to show me all the messages. How are you not showing me the messages? Oh, well, that's the problem right there. Where is our SPY++? Or our SPY 64? You can see that was the x86 version. That's not going to do us any good. We need the 64-bit version, which apparently... Why wouldn't this launch the 64-bit version by default? Is there something... Like, how is that not a thing? Hopefully we actually have it. Let's see here. SPY++ x64. Here we go. So this is what we actually want. So let's just change that because let's, like, why didn't they just put the other one in here as well? It just seems like such a lame excuse. Uh, just want to see this. So is it actually in this location or not? I don't really know. Let's find out. Yes, it is. So I think that should fix it. Like now we should have the ability to get the 64-bit version, which why you wouldn't... You know that it's a 64-bit executable, so why you wouldn't launch the 64-bit version of Spy, don't want to know. Again, we'll just bring this back up here. But let's go ahead and actually see if it can capture our messages now. Right, here's our window. Here's Spy++. Here's our Handmade Hero window. Messages. Ah, there we go. So now we finally got our messages. So now what I want to know is, like, what happens during this change? Like, if I hit Alt-Enter, what happens? So if we look in there, we can see, looks like we've got window pause changed, gets sent twice, right? You can see it. I don't want to move the mouse because then we'll lose what we're doing. But if you look at the top, the very top, it sends like, you know, window pause change with LPWP. That's the window pause there. And then it sends. So what is SRP, SRPPSR? What are those tags? Oh, that's the return value. I see. So we didn't get it twice. We only got it once. Let's go ahead and here. We don't care about mouse moves, so I'm going to filter those out so that we don't have this problem. Messages. Oops. So let me go ahead and get rid of like mouse. We'll get rid of NCHI hit test, so because we don't want any of that either. Well, I'll just do it this way. It's a remarkable amount of stuff that gets set even when you just do this. All right, so if we clear the log and I click on the window, we get all of this crap. So just clicking into the window sends window pause changing. Somehow. Don't know how. Am I wrong about that? Let's get this back to this size and see. It looks like it might always, yeah. I mean, you can see window pause changing and window pause changed. I suppose window pause changed may be the only one we actually need there. It's hard to say. But that gets sent even just on a click. When we go into full screen, which I can do again by running, let's go ahead and clear that log. Does this still work, or do I have to rehunt for the window? Probably have to rehunt for the window, yeah. All right. Oh my God, are you kidding me? It resets the logging options every time? Why would it do that? Okay. It's fine. So let's go ahead here and see what we could maybe do to fix this, right? This seems to get called a lot, and it seems like maybe we can't really rely on that. Now, why it wouldn't always be reasonable, though, to call this based on whether we're becoming full screen or not, I don't really know. If we actually change this to changed, I wonder if that would be something that would make sense to do here. So, meaning we wouldn't actually set it during this. This just allows it to do what it's going to do. So, meaning this will just happen. But then after the change is done, if we want to remove those things, you know, does that do anything for us? And the problem is, I don't really know that it would. I don't really know that that would help. But basically, we could just say, in window pause changed, if you're not full screen anymore, then we would switch it out, right? But let's see. So, WM, actually, let's leave that up. Fantastic. So here's that message. The L param looks like it's still the same. So in theory, we should just be able to continue doing this. And right here, we can say, look, give us that thing. We probably want in here to still call the default window proc, because we don't actually know what it might want to do in that case, right? So let's go ahead and try this out. I don't think this is going to help, but you know, with Windows, it's always just experimentation. See if anything works, right? So that's better. We know that's a bug still. So that all looks pretty good. So I guess let's leave it at that. One thing I would want to test is, does this create a problem in toggle full screen? Suppose I get rid of that now. Because I'm assuming I can't do that. I'm assuming that I need to clear that in order to get a proper full screen window, but I don't actually know. So I'm just curious if it would magically work, right? So it looks like that actually magically works now. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So maybe we can just do that and see. Again, don't really know if how reasonable that is. So that's just a way to say, look, if you end up with a window, hopefully this will always just set the flags based on whether we're actually full screen or not, so that it doesn't matter whether Windows sets us full screen or windowed, or we set ourselves full screen or windowed. We'll always put our Chrome on or take it off depending on the actual state of the window. That's the hope. I think we still need a lot of testing. Other people can run it now and see what happens, because we really don't know across a wide setting of a wide set of Windows machines. We don't really. Okay. Wow, everything's dead now. I can't hit Alt-Tab either. That was freaky. WinSpy must have borked us pretty hard there. I couldn't hit Alt-Tab even. That's messed up. So yeah, I think that should be fine. Let me make sure that comment got saved. Yeah. So I think that's all good, and I'll just I'll rate that bug as finished and then ask if they can possibly reopen it, right? All right, so the only other thing I need to do now is take a look at this part here, which is the 0, 0 width and height problem. And so looking at how that's working, I'm not really sure I know why we're getting that. So when we have a settings change, I'm not sure. I'm assuming that that's happening in here, and the game render settings are what's triggering that. I'm trying to figure out why they would get set to 0 in the first place. So I don't think we're ever changing that value, though, right? Like, why is that value ever getting reported even in the first place? It must be here. So we're passing this thing down where we do renderer begin frame. I think we just screwed this up because we're not really supposed to be looking at this stuff anyway. And that would also explain why we were getting those weird positioning problems. So like if you look at what's going on here, in that begin frame call, that looks busted. So I'm going to look in here. What are we doing with window width and window height? Like, why are those even being used anywhere? Because we don't draw in there, right? Like, that doesn't actually get placed in there anywhere. And the draw region is really what we're talking about here. So this stuff is just kind of, yeah, we got to pay more attention to this. So who is using that window width and window height and why? Does that make sense? That's what I really need to know more about now. So I'm going to go into the platform stuff, or actually I guess that's in the renderer. I want to know what's going on there, because that smells rotten to me. So this window with the window height, so where is that getting used right now? I need to see who's using that and why. So we're using it in there. Yeah, so this is wrong. And this is why our UI was screwed up. No one should be using that. So that should really be called something else. Let's make this clear. So draw region is actually the thing that we want to use, and anyone who was using OS window with an OS window height before, that's just bad, right? So this is fine, you know, that's not a problem. But here, for example, I don't know if this is right. Let me look. Is that actually getting used? And what was it getting used for? All right, so that's fine. And this is not fine. So this should be like, you know, there should be like a dim here. Where we say that. Don't know if we have a get dim on that. Probably not. So the actual thing that's getting passed in there is like one of those rectangles, right? It's this. So we want something that would give us the dimensions of that rectangle. But as you can see, that's really only for rectangles that are float at the moment. So we want a thing that's like gonna do this, probably, where we can get the dim out of it. But you know what we could do? We could also just upconvert it. Like this. Oops. Something like this. Oh, sorry, that actually gets the dimensions. I actually want to give it the full thing here. So that way we could upconvert those and say, look, I want the floating point version of this rectangle, please. And that seems good. Then in here where we've got like the width and height and stuff, right? This is just this rectangle, this rect center dim. Really that just comes, you know, we can just get the dim of, well, we already have it, it's region dim. So that should all just work fine. And then here we just need like region dim width and region dim width there. And I think that's all good, right? It's not. Let's fix that. So I think that's probably going to fix that problem we were having with the alignment code too. So in here, I don't know if you remember when we went to like the editor, it was like weirdly not aligned to the screen, and now it should always be, right? And it is. So that's a good thing, right? So that fixes that problem we were having, which is good because I don't want to have that problem. That's perfect. Now everything's fine. So that fixes that problem, but now we still have to go deal with the original problem, which is that we were getting bad behavior in there for when these things happen to degenerate to 0, and I want to find out why that's happening, because I don't understand why we would be getting that. I didn't think anyone was using the window width or height, so why, when you minimize, you get that degeneration, I don't understand. So I'm going to switch to debug mode real quick and see if I can't get a beat on that. Let's take a look. We'll run this. And all I should have to do is minimize it, and that causes the problem, right? So we have a create frame buffer call. The width and height are 0, so let's find out who is doing that and why. The render width, render height here are set to the settings width and height, so that's saying that someone's setting our width and height in the settings. Who is doing that, right? I have no idea who's doing that or why. I do not know why that's happening. Okay, so I guess I see what's going on here. So this is a bit of a mind bender. So it looks like we actually don't do what I thought we did, which is to render to a separate target resolution and then change. It looks like we actually render directly to the resolution that's being requested. So that's not really what we want. In fact, the draw region isn't really what we want either. We want a separate thing for the render width and height. Like, it should not be set to those things. That is incorrect. Does that make sense? So, like, the draw region, that's also wrong. Right? Like I actually didn't do what I should have done there. If you look at the UI stuff, in here, it should not get that either. This is the OS draw region. So no one should be using that draw region. The region dim should actually just come from the commands width and the commands height, the render version of those, right? That should actually be stated explicitly. So in here, like, really this should be OS draw region. And we really want this. And that should be something that we set manually, that we can set to other things. Because we may want to render and downsample, we may want to render and upsample, and we supported all of that correctly, but then we don't do it for some reason, and I don't know why. That may have just been an oversight, or maybe we had switched it that way temporarily and then just forgot we should switch it back. So I feel like we want to do this and this, like so. So that seems like a much more sane way to go. So in here I would like, I don't know if I can do this, but that is what I actually wanted. All right, let's deal with the fallout from that. So in here, I want one of these. This way I can just convert those anytime I want. So I want to get one of these back from my render dimensions and just use that. That should always be the case. Oops. I had an extra period in there. In here I want to set the OS dim directly to those window width and heights. That's what I would expect there too. Oh, and we do have a render width and a render height. It's in the settings. Okay, so we did actually have that. It's right here. So that's what we actually wanted. We wanted that render setting there. And so we want everyone to drive off of that now. And we don't want this to be set here, right? That is not what should happen. That is bad and should not occur. Like wrong, false, incorrect. We have to set that somewhere else because that doesn't change based on the window height. We could change it based on the window height, but we don't want it to be set to. We don't want it to be set directly. So in here now we should have this, which will give us both of those things. In here, this is the OS draw region and should only be used when you know that that's what you're actually trying to do. Oops. This is fine. And that's all fine. So that looks good. In here where we get the window dim stuff, that's fine too. In here, this is going to be the rendered dim version. So this was, like I said, this was basically set up correctly. It's just we were using it incorrectly, and so I just want to clean that up. I'm not sure what this part is for here. Okay. Let's just set this up nicely. There we go. And this can just do that. So just pipe that through. All right. Now, one of the things I'm not sure about is what are we doing with the projection in the math? Like, where is the math library pulling that from? So in renderer, when we do set camera transform, and it does the perspective projection, I guess it just assumes. Like, how does that take into account the region of the screen that it's looking at? I guess it doesn't. Doesn't look like it really does. There it is. Okay, so this is using the correct value as well. We already modified that. So everything now should be fine, except for the fact that we never actually set the render dimension, right? Like, we use it everywhere. We correctly separated it from the window dimension. And so the only thing that we have to do now is actually set it somewhere, right? Because right now we're not actually ever setting that. So in the place where we set the render settings, we need to actually have that occur. So setting those initial values, looks like we don't really do here, unfortunately. So here's where we do our game commands. You can see us doing this here, where we do a begin frame. So when we get that out, I guess you know, when you look at what we're actually doing here, I guess that can just be set directly. So I think this here, oops. I think we should be able to just set that and be good to go. Oh, and I should probably switch to O2 mode. So now we will continue rendering to our back buffer at the appropriate size, even as we, you know, shrink down, right? And so we may want to like change exactly how we're picking that, because we may want to switch to smaller buffer sizes as we go. But again, that's something we would choose to do. And that way, when we minimize, we can still be running properly and so on. And so that's just how we want to do that. Now, we may, in the future, again, want to change that around so that we can use smaller sizes for smaller screens or whatever. But that's a separate issue that we'll you know, sort of play with later on. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to do here. So now we should be able to render at a different resolution. So if I wanted to, I could render, oops, I could render very small. So for example, like really, really tiny screen, and then blow it up. And that should work now. So you can see like super fuzzy game, right? Hard to use the interface there. So we may want to fix that part too. There's things we could do for that as well. So if we render at a really low resolution just to see what happens, you can see there's no issue there. So I think that's all good. And yeah, I think that's all good. So one thing I would say here is, you know, maybe we take global render dim and global render dim goes away. Maybe what we say is global enforced aspect ratio, and that's just always 16:9. So then we know that when we rescale the window, if we force the aspect ratio, it'll force 16:9. Like that. And then this won't do this, and we won't have render dim because it was only getting used here anyway. So instead, we'll just move this down because this is something we can do later. That's something we can do right here. Oops. So then global render dim is never a thing. It's just render dim is the only thing that we actually do here. And so what that means is now when we're running, we can't always choose to change those values if we wanted to, right? At any time. And so that's better, right? We only have them in one place. And so then, yeah, if we want to do some other resolution, like say, you know, this one, so that this would be fine. Like this would probably be a reasonable resolution to render to if you have a slower GPU. You know, that looks totally fine, right? That's totally playable. And so now we're getting a 19 by 1080 display, but we're actually rendering much lower than that, just for speed reasons, right? So we can do that, and that's just better. And we know that that can change at any time, too, so that's good, too. All right. So I think that's all done. And so the only thing left I've got on here that's a small thing to look at is the fog being broken. I think we fixed that already, right? Pretty sure it was the pre-multiply problem, and I fixed it. So I'm pretty sure that if you fog, you don't get alpha bugs now. Of course, I don't remember actually seeing any fog. So that seems bad. Although I guess the reason for that is because there's nothing, you can't, the fog always gets set based on the hero's location. So I don't know, maybe that's not. So there's the fog. Again, it's set, the min setting though is kind of in a place where, you know, it's set to be the bottom of the expected floor there, which is going to be 19.4, which is below the hero. So I don't really know how to, like, that's the closest the fog can get, is like there. I need a way to like stop the camera. But I think we fixed it already, I guess is what I'm saying. I think the alpha is fixed. I think it's actually correct. I just don't have much of a way to test that. We need something hopping around down there. How much time do we have? What if I count like 1 minute? Crap. Crappity poo. So what I would have to do here is like, I don't know, can we add a snake real quick or something? So let's suppose that I grab one of these things for adding an orphan, right? And I add a hopper snake, add snake. So if I wanted that to be in here, actually, I guess I can just make this thing. So add snake segment. Let's grab that, make it a real entity we can put in the world now. Add snake. And so here, I wouldn't necessarily know which segment index it was supposed to be, so I probably can't... I'm not sure exactly what to do about that, but I guess I'll just, for now, make it like that. Looking at what we're doing here, I think, you know, just looking at the add orphan stuff, we're going to do the same thing here that we would do. All of this stuff would stay the same. Adding these pieces in probably needs to get modified a little bit. It wouldn't have a shadow anymore. That gets handled by the lighting. I don't know that we would put a light on there, but okay, so maybe there's a light on there. Who knows? Then we've got the body head stuff, and this stuff is probably going to have to be changed to something that has some tagging on it, at least in some way. And we probably need some connect piece to world stuff, right? We would probably need to do something like this. so we just connect it to the world and give it its go. Seems like it would be fine. We're not really doing hit points at the moment, so that, you know, might work for adding a snake, maybe. Not sure what the brain ID thing was for there. I guess the brain ID gets passed in. So this stuff is going to have to be for creating more complex things, which we don't have the ability to do at the moment inside the generator. We'd have to add sort of that way of making that work. Place entity is not necessary, right? Just do this. And then I think we can just add those. Yeah. So if I want to add one of those to the world now, like if I want to have any time there's a dungeon tile, so because we had, like, you know, in the world gen code, we had like this notion of like dungeon tiles in here, which we don't really do anything with at the moment. So, you know, there's create dungeon, right? This thing. So if every time we create one of these rooms, you can sort of see in here we're doing like who knows what we're doing here. We're just doing like create dungeon, got floor entrance and previous room and whatever else, right? Excuse me. If when we create these things, we just put stuff in them, so like all the chain rooms, for example, we just added one of those to it. So we just said like place snake, and we said inside this room. Like that. I think that would work. So inside the orphan stuff, we would just do the same thing. So we'd just say, you know, add an entity, add a tag, I guess. I don't know what our tags might want to be. Seems reasonable. So it's like a skeleton-ish thing. I don't know if we actually imported those yet. And then we would just place it in the room. Yeah. So yeah, not sure what we want to do there. Can't really say. But I think that would give us one of those little snake guys. Although we'd have to figure out how we want to add the other parts to it. But I think all of this stuff wants to go up there. There we go. So let's see. Well, I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but I don't know how to put any. I just want to look and see if the fog is fixed, and I'm not sure how else we would do that. You know what I mean? Looks like this is having a problem figuring out where to put the entity. So the appearance of the entity in there. I'm not sure why it would have trouble placing that entity. Let's go ahead and debug this. I have a little extra time. I don't mind if I go a little over today. It's not a big deal one way or the other. What time is it? It's only 2 o'clock, so I'm fine. What is it complaining about? So we added an entity group that doesn't have anything in it. So why did we do that? Did I mess something up with that placement? Let me just double check. We add the entity. We place the entity in the room, like so. So that should just work, right? Let's do an assert. Just in case. So somehow, when we go in here, we're getting an entity group that doesn't have any entities in it. And I don't know how that's possible, because the only time we ever add an entity group, there should be an entity in it, right? So I'm kind of at a loss there. You can see that the only time we actually call it is when we call place entity. And immediately after that, we put an entity into that group. So it's like it's getting erased somehow. Like it was there, and then it's not. So how's that happening? Let's look at the call for place snake, which is right here. Is it possible that the room is somehow not correct sometimes, or something weird like this? You know, we're always generating a room. I don't think we're doing anything weird with the room. So here's a question. Let's suppose we didn't do this. I'm assuming that that's the only problem, right? Like it's just we call that and we get borked, right? So let's suppose I added it to one of the other rooms. So in here, we just say, oh yeah, like, you know, the thing is in the hero's bedroom. Is it just the snake that causes the problem? Like something about our snake call sucks? So the snake call seems fine, although I don't see it. Oh, no, there it is. There it's going. So it's hopping around out here. There it is. All right. So if I want to put this body piece up a little bit, I might just do that. And I might also make its light a little bit brighter. I think this is this the brightness or the size? I don't really know. let's go ahead and change that around. All right. So yeah. There's one of those saucy gentlemen there hopping around. I may have made that light too bright, and I admit that. So maybe that's inappropriate. So now I guess I really just don't understand why why I can't seem to get that guy to be placed in a dungeon. So we have a bug in our world gen stuff, which admittedly we kind of threw a bunch of sort of like shoddily constructed things, I guess I would say, in there real quick because we wanted to do some placement stuff. And so I'm not surprised, but I also don't necessarily know what the problem is. Could this stuff be a lot better? Sure, but also just don't know why we're getting that problem. So if we look at place snake and we're able to place the snake, and then we go look at why I can't move that around, I don't follow it. Because inside create dungeon, where we're making these rooms, it should be free for us after we create one of those. We should be able to just say like, okay, put one of those into that room. And then, so we're creating this chain and, we're connecting those up. And that's fine. We're connecting things randomly along the chain. That seems fine too. Oh. Why are we doing this? Well, that's almost certainly our problem. We can't do this. How is this working? That seems super busted, because you can see us generating a bunch of stuff here. You can't do a temp memory on that. Right? Because if you look at what's going on there, we've got memory and temp memory. Is temp memory being used? Where is that being used? Did we mess up? Yeah, so that's like using that like a stack, which is really not what we would want to do there. That's the problem. Because we need to use the temp memory to create stuff. I don't know what our idea was here. Is the idea that the memory, like when do we use the memory? Okay. So this was my screw up. So we have temp memory, and like, so for example, here where we're adding these options, these should not be temporary memory, right? I feel like these are all supposed to be real memory, right? So the only time we would use the temporary is for stacks and stuff. That was just me being dumb. So when you add entities and stuff, those are getting added to real memory, not temp memory. So that was just dumb. I should make a note of that so we don't make that mistake again. The whole point of having those two is so that we can flush all the stuff away that we just used as temporary, and yeah, I screwed that up. Alright, so in theory now there should be people hopping around down there, right? And there are. I need a way to set the fog in here. Just see what happens. I want to make sure the alpha works okay. So it looks like we still have some weird stuff happening with the fog. Like those things that are lit, the fog is wrong on those, for sure, right? So the alpha's fine. We fixed the alpha, but the lighting now is not doing the pre-multiplied alpha properly. So in here, where do we compute our lighting? Because that's not coming in properly. So here we go, blah, 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 fog amount. You can see it multiplying it here. Surface reflect RGB multiplies by the lighting value. So this is the problem right here. This is not acceptable, right? So you look in here, we take the mod color. That's got the appropriate alpha coming in. We then have this lighting value that's getting multiplied in here. That is not going to affect the alpha like it should. Although, to be fair, right, so that can reduce the alpha addition of those values. I guess I actually am not sure that that's really correct. Because we should be able to do the lighting. The lighting is just going to change the color, which should be fine because it has already been diminished. I guess if the alpha value, no, I honestly don't know why that's wrong. That seems like that should be right because the RGB here, the alpha value was already set. This RGB, if it should have faded away to nothing, this should just, this can't increase the value. And I guess maybe it can, because when we do maybe the problem is the L value can be increased above 1. But that isn't really commensurate with what we were seeing, because we were seeing things that were blackened, effectively. So I don't know what's going on there. Right? Because you can see that this is not a question of boosting above 1, really. Because this has no lighting on it. So it couldn't possibly be like 2 or something, right? So why that is not still properly set to 0 in the lighting region, I don't understand. Because multiplying by a value would reduce the color that you're contributing. But it should already have been set to the alpha should already have been set to 0 anyway. And so should those values. I don't see it. Maybe someone else does, but I don't. Because, once you get into sunlight, I guess, part of it is this should really be done. Even that. So that doesn't really make sense, because you can see that's like, there's no alpha left there. So why I guess because the fog value here, you would have to check again. So I guess it's like we did the fog value. Now the alpha is effectively 0. We lerped between these two things. Okay. I can see, I guess, what's going on there. The alpha value isn't really 0 at that point, right? It's like, it's just been fogged, but it's not, the alpha, that's not reducing the alpha. The alpha is still full. Fog is not alpha. It doesn't fade out, it's just coloring it. So I suppose that makes sense. So what we want to do is light before we fog. I think that's really the situation that we're dealing with here. So instead of this, I think we want this. So I think the alpha is correct. The problem is the fog was actually not correct. So we need this to happen second. So mod color RGB needs to be set up here, right? Another way to say this would be like surface reflect shouldn't have an A, right? Surface reflect should just be an RGB. So surface reflect does its thing. And then when we get back, right, and this is just mod color RGB. This is just surface reflect here. And we clamp it out. I think that's what we're supposed to be doing. Again, a bit of a mind bender. So let's go ahead and check that out. But we were fogging, we lit after we fogged, but fog is supposed to apply after lighting. Like we're supposed to, the attenuation from the fog happens after the lighting. So we were effectively lighting our fogged values, which of course can make them darker. So that is what we should have expected. I was just thinking about it wrong. So that's another bug. That isn't even the one we wanted to fix. So now we can see it inside our lighting region here. We can see the lighting happening. So let's play with the fog now, and we should be able to get it to work properly now, right? Hopefully. So that still looks as bad. Did I still screw up that equation? Oh, whoops, the compile didn't actually compile because we were still running. There we go. Oh, it didn't like that. It did not like that. All right. So we got some swizzle mask errors there. Let's take a look. That all seems okay. Okay, so that's not right. Because that only exists on the mod color. Let's see if we can get that better. We should probably put this in the hot loading set because there's no reason not to hot load the renderer. It's in a DLL now. We should just load it when it changes. Assignment of incompatible types. You are correct. All right. All right, now let's see if we've got our fog solved. So it's better, but we're now getting the fogging is fogging to 0, which is not what I wanted. I want to fog to the fog color. So I think I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why we would be getting that behavior. The fog color is a constant color. We're lerping from the surface reflectance to it. Yeah, and I don't really know why that's unhappy. I mean, you can see pretty clearly that it's fogging. It now fogs everything uniformly like it should, but it's fogging it to 0, like a black, but it should be fogging it to a gray because that's the fog color, right? So something's weird there, and I'm not sure what it is, because that lerp should be forcing it towards the fog color by fog amount no matter what happens, and yet it doesn't actually seem to do that. So it grabs the mod color, which is the alpha and fragment texture stuff, right? That all comes through. It looks to see if it's going to proceed. Assuming it is going to proceed, it starts with that mod color. It's weird. Why do we not have a right here? What's going on with that? Why is this here? Shouldn't this be at the end? Like, why is that not there? I don't know that that has anything to do with it, but that should be over there, right? Because if we're simulating the sRGB stuff, it should be at the end, not at the beginning. I don't actually know if we're doing that. So it looks like we're presumably doing that because allow... Oh, no, we're not. So we are going down that path. So that could also be a problem. But we got a lot of graphic stuff we can clean up. Yeah, so we're using this our own square, because remember, we have different values for those. At the moment, we have different values for the squares and square roots and stuff like that. All right, let me take a look now. There we go. So that was just a quick case of us, like, we'd like sort of futzed with the shader too much. And so we were doing the square root for sRGB, like our fake sRGB. We were doing that in like the totally wrong places because it just got moved around so much. So we were actually just completely throwing off our calculations from that. So there now, looks like the alpha is correct and the other fog stuff is correct. So if I set the fog to a rather extreme thing there, so there's just a lot of fog, we can just double check that it always works properly. Looks fine to me. There's like our lighting, of course, still has like the little tiny region of lighting, so we're never going to see that be completely correct, but so that was causing all of our colors to be off a little bit, right? All right. Whew. Well, I'm glad we fixed that. And with that, I think we are down. We are going to start the new year with essentially no to-dos on the list. This one is just one that we want to re-enable when we get back to audio. So I think we're down to no bugs outstanding that we wanted to fix in the short term there, so that's really good. All right, I'll go do a brief Q&A. Uh-oh. What happened here? Is Twitch messed up? Well, all right. I guess that may be the end of it. I don't know if I can... Looks like Twitch went down or something. So I don't know. Let me ask on the chat. I'd like to do a Q&A, but no one can hear me. Twitch is dead. So I don't know. I don't know why I can't stream to Twitch. Maybe the route to Twitch got borked, or maybe my internet got borked, but I can see the chat just fine. So yeah, I don't know if we can do a Q&A. Probably not, if that's the situation. I'll try really briefly to see if I can reconnect it, but I'm not hopeful. OBS, I don't even know if we can change that online. It can't, yeah, it can't change that. Well, I guess I'll stop streaming, and we'll just call it a day there, because I can't figure out any way, like, OBS can't switch servers in the middle of streaming. It doesn't allow you to do that as far as I can tell. So there's really not anything else I can see. So, oh well, that may be our last stream. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I can have time for another one tonight, but thank you for trying to join me for another episode of Handmade Hero. I'm not sure why Twitch went down, but Twitch sometimes does go down. So you'll just have to catch up with these on the video on demand because it was still recording, so we have the recording just fine, just wasn't broadcast live. That's it for today and probably until we come back from winter break. So until the new year, have fun programming, everyone, and I'll see you online. Oh, and obviously for those of you who are new to the series, if you happen to want to follow along the series at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code so you can follow along and do some programming on your winter break on it if you want to do some experiments. So that's it. Take it easy, everybody, and I'll catch you in the new year.